Recording and copy.
Assalamualaikum. We resume actually we start our session now. The topic is misconceptions about women in Muslim and among Muslims. Dr. Shehzad will deliver a speech on that, and then after that we will have a question and answer. That format is in English, but of course if somebody wants to ask a question in Urdu, that's the perfect concept. Thank you very much. So, please.
That was the first question.
Yes. Okay.
Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, we are very sorry for starting this program way behind schedule, and the reason is something that we have helped. The topic that we are going to discuss today, obviously, as has been announced, some common misconceptions regarding women amongst Muslims. Now, the issue regarding Muslims and women amongst Muslims is something that has been under discussion for so many years, and in fact, I start off about 2 centuries ago. The movement of feminism, which started off with Mary Wollstonecraft's famous book of Vindication of the Rights of Women, somewhere in the 18th century. It generally started because of the oppression women have faced at the hands of religion. So it's not just certain perceptions that Muslims have. It's like a worldview regarding women, which was continuing for a better part of a couple of centuries. And it was in reaction to this that the movement of feminism started, as you would know, and it is still continuing. And today we face certain other dimensions of this movement. And as this movement dilutes itself, enters into various countries, we find certain cultural aspects also being added. So amongst Muslims in particular, we find that there are certain verses of the Quran which have led to this feministic, I would say, revolution or feministic movement as well within Muslims as well. So Muslim women have become torch bearers as well of feminism in many countries, not only in the West, but in the subcontinent as well. You'll find dissenting voices. You'll find in events like Aurat March. You'll find events like something very similar in which the rights of women would be taken up in a very proactive way. So the question is that what exactly has gone wrong here, and what exactly is the matter with Muslim? Is it Islam which oppresses women? Is it the fact that there is a lot of culture that has crept into religion, as a result of which we find this women, I would say, women bashing or women demeaning attitude from our Muslim, I would say, patriarchy? Because you would be knowing this, that ever since mankind has started, we are living in a patriarchal society under the influence of male dominance. And because of the fact that this male dominance is something that has been continuing, and seemingly there are certain Quranic verses and sections which lend credence to the fact that as far as women are concerned, they are subservient to men. And then not only in the Quran, as I shall go on, there are certain hadith narratives also which seemingly, I'm still saying the word seemingly or allegedly, support the fact that yes, there is something. It's like women being called as second-rate citizens or second-rate human beings, because as we know that they are narratives of the Prophet which say that they have lesser intellect. For example, there is a narrative which say they are naqisatul aql, which means that their intellect is deficient. Then we have narratives which say, for example, that the Prophet said that the greater part of the population of hell consists of women. So all these things have, as I said, been a source of the fact that either they are feminist women who have taken up the job of reinterpreting many of the Quranic directives and these narratives, and there are others who have completely lost faith or hope in religion, and then they think that the religion advocated by the Quran is basically a 14th century construct. And if there are instances in which women are being spoken of such, then it's basically a cultural representation of religion of those times. So, in this background, let me start off by discussing a couple of major misconceptions that have plagued Muslim minds. And in this time that we have, I shall just briefly point out some of these misconceptions, and then I will open the floor, inshallah, and you can ask questions related to these issues, as well as any other thing that comes to your mind. The first and the foremost misconception, and I think that wherever I go, wherever I have a lecture on this topic, I think this is the most common misconception and the most blatant of all misconceptions, and that is the age of Aisha anha at the time of her marriage. Because there's a narrative in Bukhari, all of you know, Sahih Bukhari is a book, and it is revered by Muslims next to the Quran, and they think that whatever is mentioned in the Bukhari has to be believed, it's close to the truth. So that narrative says that when the Prophet married Aisha anha, she was 6 or 9 years old. And therefore, this does not sit well at all. Whenever we find some more details, that for example, when he was marrying Aisha, he himself was about 50 plus, he was about 55 years old. And marrying someone who is 6 years old or 9 years old for any reason doesn't make any sense. The Quran does not discuss this matter at all. So it's basically history that we are talking about. So there are two things that we also need to understand, that when we are discussing history, when we are discussing Hadith literature, then one of the principles of Hadith literature, which has been outlined by these scholars, is that no narrative which is against common sense, experience, and practice can be accepted. So the thing that comes to our mind is that the Prophet could have married, becoming a widower at that age, for two reasons. One would be for companionship, one would be to look after his daughters and sons, because his first wife, Khadija, had just passed away. And one wonders that what could a 6 or 9 year old girl, she could neither have provided companionship to the Prophet, nor would she have been in any way helpful to him regarding the household chores, maybe, or looking after children who were almost her age, or maybe slightly older to her. In fact, they were older to her because, given the fact that the Prophet married Khadija when he was 25 and she was 40, and she passed away when he was in that age bracket. So you can clearly see the ages of his own children would be very close to Aisha's own age. So it doesn't make sense. I think this is reason enough to dismiss this narrative that this is something that cannot be accepted. But besides this, I can also let you know that not only does this narrative be against common sense practice, and the fact that this is something which the Prophet would never have done, historical evidence also shows this. There's plenty of data which shows otherwise. So to give you a small glimpse of that data, and this data that I'm providing you with was first made public appearance in one of the very premier scholars of Hadith and history, Hakim Niaz Ahmed. And would you believe that he himself was a Deobandi, and he belonged to a traditional school of thought. So he said that if you look up books of history, you'll find that Asma anha, she is 10 years older to Aisha. Both are sisters. So Asma is 10 years older to Aisha. And we also know from history that Asma passed away when she was 100 years old. So she lived a long life. She was 100 years old. And the time of her passing away was 73 Hijrah. So in 73 Hijrah, she passed away. So this is one piece of information. So just to repeat that she was 10 years old to Aisha, and she passed away. The second bit of information is that she passed away in 73 Hijrah when she was 100 years old. So a very small calculation would show that at the time of Hijrah, she would be 100 minus 23, which is 100 minus 73, which is 27 years old. So Asma is 27 when the Hijrah is taking place, when the Prophet is going from Makkah to Medina. And we also know that Aisha was 10 years younger to Asma. So that would mean that at the time of migration, if Asma was 27, then her younger sister Aisha should be 17, 10 years younger. And we also know that the nikah that took place, and when Aisha actually arrived at the Prophet's house was in Medina, uh, when 2 years had gone by in the Medina period. So Aisha was already 17. She was already 17 at the time of migration. And if you add a couple of more years, because we know from history that it was only after 2 years that the Prophet had moved to Medina that she actually came to his house. So that would make 17 into 19 or 20. So she was, by this calculation, which is a calculation which all history books corroborate. So as I said, that this makes it about 19 or 20 years old. And a person of this age, of course, can be a person who's a manageable age, it's a reasonable age. There's still a big difference between her age and the age of the Prophet, because he was 50 plus and she's close to 20. But the fact is that this is something which would still have provided him with companionship when she was in this age, and obviously she would have been someone who could have not only looked after but been friends with the children as well. And thus this also makes sense. So I think that we Muslims need to revisit this data once again, and we need to present this to the world as well, and not only to the world but to our own next generation as well, and to the youngsters that are sitting here, who, when they are told that, look, Nauzubillah, your Prophet was a pedophile, or he was someone who was after a girl, this is an absolutely baseless statement, and it has arisen once again because of data which has been provided by our own history books, which is of course Hadith. So what comes to light is the fact that when you have such issues, when you have this data in front of you, it's always important that you realize that history and Hadith, they need to be critically evaluated. In spite of the fact that Imam Bukhari was a very revered Hadith scholar, it doesn't mean that whatever he has put down in his book is absolutely 100% correct. I mean, it was his research, and as such, his research could have been wrong and could have been right. So the problem has arisen because of this attitude which Muslims have adopted towards Hadith literature and its infallibility. They think that whatever has been recorded by Imam Bukhari is infallible. It's as good as the Quran. And as I said, not only is it against common sense and practice about which all of these scholars say must be employed when you interpret a narrative, but at the same time, as I just presented before you the data, that historical data also does not at all put up to this notion. So this is the first and the most common misconception, and this is something not only our Muslims, of course, they need to be told, but many of our non-Muslim critics, because they cling to these things, and in all sincerity, they make this claim. And one thing that I'd also like to point out here is that when you hear criticism from non-Muslims, instead of getting reactionary, instead of getting emotionally upset, the right way would be to look at the criticism itself. You see, you have to be dispassionate, you have to be objective. If the criticism is correct, then, I mean, as a seeker of the truth, as a person who would like to find out the truth, we ourselves should accept it. And if it is not correct, then of course it should be set right. But expressing anger, expressing hate, expressing emotions, breaking public property, doing all sorts of things, I don't think this is going to be of any benefit. And unfortunately, this is what we generally do. So whether it was the cartoon controversy which erupted in Denmark about 10, 15 years ago, whether it's the issue of Quran burning, which is still going on in Sweden, whether it's the issue of Aisha's age and all these things, there is one element, one lesson I think that we Muslims need to learn, and that is to be dispassionate, critical thinkers instead of succumbing to emotions, instead of thinking that, well, we have been challenged and all hell has broken loose, and therefore we have to preserve ourselves, and as the only means to preservation, we think that is to show reaction. And you can see in the last 3 days in the background of this Quran burning, what has gone on in our Muslim Ummah, and how, of course, this was a very wrong, horrific act. It can never be condoned. But the thing is that we have to understand the reason and why do people behave like this, and how do we address these issues, and how we take them in a way that we are able to not only silence our critics in an academic way, but at the same time also not use up our time in such useless activities. So the second misconception or second major misconception that I would like to discuss with you today is the issue of slavery or women slaves. And we also know that the Prophet himself had a woman's a slave lady by the name of Maria, and she was gifted to the Prophet by the king of Egypt. So once again, we are faced with an issue sitting in our society at this time of the 21st or 22nd century, close to the 22nd century, that we think that as far as slavery is concerned, all these issues are concerned, they are really a smack of not only arrogance, but a smack of a society in which women, in particular, they are demeaned to such an extent that they become assets and commodities. Because when you have women slaves, or for that matter, if you have slaves amongst men, then it does speak of the fact that human beings have gone to this extent that they are starting to own living beings and they treat them as animals. But the issue gets graver here, and it's not just an issue of slavery, because the issue of slavery was rampant all over the world, and it's right up to the last maybe 50 or 60 years that we have gotten rid of it completely. But the thing it has been called into question regarding slavery or the issue of slavery amongst Muslims is the fact that women slaves, they could be, I mean, men could be, or their masters to be more precise, they could be intimate with their women slaves, and besides having wives, they could keep these slave ladies, and you can call them concubines, you can call them whatever you like, but they were out of wedlock relations, which seemingly Muslim men were allowed to do. And if you look at the Arab society of those times, you'll find the Sahaba companions having scores of slave ladies, and as such, it does seem strange that how could have Islam put up with this? Now, the general view about this issue of slavery is that if today, even today, if there is a war between a Muslim and a non-Muslim country, and the Muslim warring country wins that war, then that country can capture slaves from the other country and have them distributed among the soldiers or the combatants and have intimate relations with them. So I remember when I was studying in my university, a very strange incident. One of our teachers, in fact, he was a teacher of physics, and a very, very genuine person, a very competent person who had a very good degree. He was a PhD in physics from Stanford. So one day, this is way back in 1983, about 40 years ago. So this was a time in which India, I come from Pakistan, so I'm just going to relate to you an incident which belongs to that time. So in 1983 or 1984, the Indian Prime Minister was Indira Gandhi. And on our side, there was this continuous threat and continuous talk that India and Pakistan are going to go to war, because there were some military exercises going on near the borders. So one fine morning, we were in our class, and our physics professor, he came to us and he started to lecture. But before he began the lecture, he said, well, gentlemen, if there is a war between India and Pakistan, I'm going to capture Indira Gandhi and she's going to become my slave lady. And all of us were shocked. I mean, we were shell shocked. We said that, well, first of all, it's a physics class. And secondly, I mean, it is totally out of the blue that he landed this. But the point that I'm just making here today is that even a person who, I mean, he was not a very religious person. He was an ordinary person, but even a person like him, a common professor, such was the momentous thing that he had in mind that, well, if there is going to be a war between India and Pakistan, then he is going to become the owner of a slave. And who that, I mean, it's not an ordinary person, but of the Prime Minister of India as well. So what I'm referring to here is that it's not just our religious people who think that this is what is going to go on, but even people like our professor, who was a very secular person, he also thinks that this is something which is acceptable. I mean, this is something which is acknowledged, and there are no two opinions to it. So today, if you look upon people and you talk to people who belong to religion, I mean, who are advocates of religion, who are proponents of religion, who are religious scholars, not only they, but also people who don't practice religion, this is like a consensus in their minds that yes, we still can have slave ladies, capture them, and be intimate with them. Now, this is the picture that I'm telling you today, because this is how it is reflected in the media. And this is how not only it is reflected in the media, but this is also how our scholars present it. And there's no two opinions about it, that they think that it is still allowed and we can still continue with that. So you find this issue to be discussed in every instance whenever we discuss women issues. So let me now present before you a counter interpretation of what had gone on in the life of the Prophet and whether they were slaves and how this issue was tackled. So you see, as I just alluded to, you would agree that if you read about the pre-Islamic Arab society, and of course the time when the Prophet chanced upon the society, when the Quran was being revealed, it was a society in which slavery was part and parcel of that society. I mean, every house had slave women, scores of them, slave men as well, who would carry out their chores, who would do all their tasks. But at the same time, in the case of men who would own slave ladies, they were allowed to have intimate relations. But the reverse was not true. For example, if you had a female owner, she would not have relations with her male slave. This was not the Arab practice, but the reverse was always there. And the fact is that because of this rampant practice, that every house had slaves, and slavery was had become such an integral part of the Arab society, that the Quran actually, if you look at the Quran, I'm just going to walk you through the Quran. The Quran actually gave gradual directives to eradicate this issue of slavery. So had it made an immediate issue of proscribing slavery, it would have become extremely difficult to handle the issue of slavery. First, women who were generally, slaves, they had been not good moral upkeep, and they would have gone and become prostitutes, and as they were opened prostitute dens in the society. Women or men who were slaves, they were not skilled generally, and had they been immediately released, they would have gone and created that huge economic pressure on the society, because they would have produced that joblessness in the society. There was no means to employ them. So their employment was primarily through household chores and through these services. So what the Quran did was that it adopted a gradual way to eradicate slavery. And this gradual way, within this gradual way, let's say like 15 or 20 years, it gave sanction to slavery. That what it said was that yes, if you keep slaves during this time, we would condone that, but there was a certain time after which it was totally stopped. So to give you a broader picture, when the Prophet moved to Medina, as I just said, the biggest source of slavery were these wars. So whenever people would be captured in these wars, women or men who were free, otherwise, they would be captured and made slaves. So the first thing that the Quran did was that it said that when you capture anyone in war, whether it's a man or a woman, you cannot enslave that person. This was the first directive that was given. And whatever you would do with that slave person would be either to release the slave girl or the slave man on ransom or without ransom. You just cannot make that person a slave to your own home. So that is how, first of all, the Quran put an end to the fact that as far as new slaves could be made, this would not become possible. So new slaves were not, there was simply no way to make them, because any war, which was the source of slavery, would not allow Muslims to make any further slave. Now, the issue that remained was of the existing slaves, because you see, this is something which the Arabs inherited from a way back. So for that, the Quran, as I said, adopted a very gradual policy, a gradual way of eradicating slavery. So, for example, the first thing that it did was it said that, there's a Quranic verse which says, "Fakurakaba," that just release these necks. And this is like a appeal which the Quran has made to all Sahaba, all the people of that time, that you should not make them slaves, you should not treat them in such a manner and release them. And as a result of this appeal, we find a lot of people releasing slaves, and at the same time also realizing that keeping slaves is something which the Quran is not at all condoning, and it wants the slaves to get released. Then it gave another directive. I mean, I'm talking about the whole movement that was launched by the Prophet and the Quran. And that was that you should treat your slaves in a way that whatever you eat, you should feed them with the same standard. Whatever you wear, you give the same clothes to your slave. And the reason was that the standard of living of slave men and women should be raised so high that it would not become possible for you to maintain slaves. If I have to wear the same clothes as my attendants or my domestic staff, it would become very difficult for me to maintain that standard of living. So the purpose was that yes, you must release them. And then this directive was given that slave women and slave men, they should be married off. You have them, get them married, and just let them live a life of chastity, because formerly what happened was that they would be married or not married, of course, they would be related to their own masters, and this would allow that intimacy to take place. So in order to raise their status, they were asked to marry each other. And then the fourth step was taken, and that was that even if they cannot, I mean, if there's no chance of marrying amongst free men or free women, Muslims were actually encouraged that you marry slaves amongst your own slaves. You marry them and marry them off. If they can't marry amongst themselves, then you also are given this leverage and this directive that you marry these slave girls so that their status is raised as their wives. And then look what the Prophet did. The Prophet actually married off his this adopted slave who was freed, of course, Zayd ibn Harisa was his name, to his cousin Zainab bint Jahash. So she was the Prophet's cousin, and Zayd was a slave. Although he was a freed slave, he was being freed, but still the stigma of slavery was there. Although this marriage would not last long, but this is what the Prophet actually did. He started, he in order to raise the standard of a slave, he married him off to a free woman. And finally, you'll see that at one instance in Surah Nur, the Quran says that if a slave demands his liberation or her liberation or emancipation from you, then you are bound to give it. You just cannot keep your slaves. And the word used by the Quran in Surah Nur, qatibuhum. If they demand mukatabat is a term of Arabic which means that the slave would commit a certain amount of money and a certain amount of service to show that he or she would be serious and would not cause any economic burden on the society and would earn her own freedom or his own freedom. So at this juncture, it was virtually as if the Quran had made them the masters of their own destiny, that they could just go out and release themselves and free themselves. So now what happened was that only those slave women and men remained, which never wanted themselves to go out. I mean, they always wanted to stay there because of their age, because of spending generations in a family. They had become so used to that family that they thought that, well, it's better that we pass the rest of our lives here. And they were the ones that were left. So what happened is that during this period of about 15 to 20 years in which slavery was gradually eradicated, I mean, initially, these appeals were made. Initially, these directives were given so that men and women would set free them automatically. But finally, there was an imperative directive that had to be followed, that if any slave asks himself or herself to be freed or to be emancipated, then the masters could not refuse that. So in these 15 or 20 years, there were two Quranic verses that you find actually talk about slavery or slave women or besides your own wives. And these are the two verses, I'm just going to cite them, which have become a source of misconception for most Muslim scholars that look here, what the Quran is telling us, that it is allowing slavery to still continue. So in Surah Mu'minun and Surah Al-Mawrid, these are two surahs, the words of the Quran are that men establish intimate relations with none illa ala azwajihim aw ma malakat aymanuhum, which means that they only have intimacy with their wives or with their slave women. Now, these two verses, of course, have led many scholars to believe that if the Quran is categorically saying that men can have relations with their wives and with their slave ladies, then that's the end of that. I mean, it's allowing us to do that. But without relating it to the context, these were the verses which were revealed in that time in which slavery was given sanction, in which it was allowed, and it was not totally proscribed. So it was like existing slaves being already there. And until the time of Mukatabat, which was right near the end of Prophet's time, this was something which had already been already existed. So what the Quran was telling Muslim men was that these chaste and righteous Muslim men, they don't establish extramarital relations. They don't marry out of wedlock. And for that, it gave them the example that they only confine themselves to their wives and their own slave ladies, because in those times, slavery was given sanction for that transient and temporary period. So this transient and temporary directive, which was given for that time, was construed, I would say, by scholars and many other people that, well, look here, these are two verses in the Quran that still say that Muslim men can own women and they can have intimacy with them. Because of which this issue has lingered on, because of which we still have, I said, my own professor saying that, well, he would like to still enslave prisoners of war as a result of that. So, to summarize what I've just said, that as far as the issue of slavery is concerned, it is a huge misconception that resides in our minds. Islam was the religion which had actually done away with this institution right in the time of the Prophet, in the time of the Prophet himself. Unfortunately, because of some Quranic verses and misunderstanding those Quranic verses, and unfortunately, because of looking at some of the practices that later once again form part of the Muslim society, that we still think that slavery is part of our society and our culture. So I'll just discuss one more misconception and then we can have this question and answer session. And this third misconception actually relates to the fact that Muslim women in general, we think they are bound that if they travel, they just cannot travel without a mahram. So if you go for Hajj, you have to have a mahram. Although now there are some conditions that have been torn down and you have to give some concession. But by and large, the consensus is if women are traveling, they cannot travel alone. So the issue of traveling with a mahram is something that all of us face, especially women who would like to go for Hajj or Umrah. Formerly, they had to have some mahram, and I have seen women at times, they were forced to lie to take a mahram. I mean, they would declare someone to be a mahram, who would not be a mahram, but because to fulfill this condition, there was no way out for them. And the reason was that they thought that the Quran these says that if women have to travel for a certain period of time in certain ways, then they cannot travel alone, they must travel with a mahram. Now you see, the misconception here which has arisen is because we don't realize that the Prophet was also a human being, he was also a ruler, and he was also, of course, a messenger of God. So whenever he talked about a lot of things, he would talk in his various capacities. Not always was he speaking on behalf of God. Not always was he speaking. In fact, he actually said this to a number of his companions, that whenever I talk to you regarding religion, you must accept it, because in that case, I speak from God. But when I give you a suggestion vis-a-vis any worldly affair, I am a person like you, and you can always question my authority. And secondly, of course, as a Muslim ruler of the state of Medina, he was also under obligation to look and to seek for the security of the society. So, as you would be knowing that in those days, traveling was a very difficult affair. Women would get looted, they would get molested, they would have their jewelry would be looted and plundered. So, in order to safeguard their journey, the Prophet said that, well, you must take along a mahram with you, because he would be like a protector. So something of an administrative directive that would be given by any ruler was what he had actually done. But because of the fact we did not differentiate between his capacity when he was given this directive, we thought that it was like a religious directive, and whenever a woman has to travel for a long distance, then she cannot go alone. So the distinction has to be made that this was a directive that was given by the Prophet in his capacity as an administrator of that region, and anyone in his place would have given the same directive, because you have to safeguard the lives of your citizens. So a corollary of this would be today that any journey, any travel, which is fraught with all these dangers, automatically we would say yes. Well, yes, you should have some protection, and women should take that protective measure, whether it's a mahram or maybe a guard or maybe any other measure. But it should not be regarded to be a religious directive. So today, if you travel by air, for example, you go for Hajj, you go for Umrah, you go to visit family far away from UK. In all these situations, the travel is absolutely secure. I mean, it's like thousands and millions of people traveling every day, and it's being secured, and there's not a problem. So this sort of a directive would not apply in these situations. But the fact, once again, is that because we have made certain, we have not divided the Prophet's personality, that he was a person who was a caregiver also, he was a husband, he was an administrator, he was a ruler, and he was God's messenger. So whatever he has given us in the capacity of a messenger of God is something that we are always under obligation to follow. As far as the other uh, forms of directive are concerned, they have to be understood in their their proper perspective. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening to me and putting up with some of these explanations. So, I would, if there are any questions, just to summarize the three misconceptions that we have discussed, that as far as slavery is concerned, this is something which is it is stigma on the title of or the label of religion. We, Islam as a religion does not condone slavery in any way. We discussed the fact that the Prophet never married Aisha anha at the age of 6 or 9. She was a marriageable age when this marriage took place. And finally, women traveling with children is an issue which is an absolutely misconstrued and a misplaced issue. It does not mean that every time a woman has to go for a long distance, she has to take along her husband or a brother or maybe someone else. And then there are several other grave issues. I mean, I have written a whole book on this topic. It's called Common Misconceptions and Misperceptions about Women amongst Muslims. So you can refer to that book, and I have also lectures on this topic. So I've actually singled out a total of 30 major misconceptions. I was just able to discuss these three with you for lack of time, but if you'd like to have more on them, which includes issues like, for example, marrying amongst the people of the book, it includes the issue of wife beating, it includes the issue of daughter's half share in inheritance, so many other things that might crop up in your mind, the issue of parda, the issue of dressing up of women, etc. So I've left them maybe for your question and answer session, or maybe if you could just refer to those books or those lectures. So thank you very much, and you are now free to ask any questions.
Can I?
Sure.
Yes, please.
You did mention inheritance and parenthood in your book. Would you agree, we are talking about the issue of women, that it's common knowledge that women throughout the history and globally have been a subterfuge. Whatever we say, whatever we want to do, that's the fact. But I was looking at the laws of inheritance only recently. What I didn't know, and I think most people may not know, and when the Versailles distributed, Versailles after the death, God has created a system which starts with women's share first. It doesn't say that the man will get this, it says the woman gets this, whatever her relationship is. And then next thing is how it will follow with the father, son, or whoever. Common knowledge is amongst the subcontinent Muslims that the inheritance goes to the son twice as much and the father as much to the But inheritance law is extremely complicated. It's globally most complicated for different reasons. At every stage, we find that the direction starts with the woman's share first, and then it goes on. So, for instance, simple thing is mother gets 1/6, father gets 1/6. It's not true that the father is getting twice.
Yeah.
But my question to you is, why don't this scholars? Public is a good place, and nobody would go that deeply into it. Why don't these scholars make it common knowledge? So when people come with their disputes about the inheritance, why aren't they informed? They just give the answer.
I can speak for myself. I do try that. I mean, you see, the fact is that we were discussing this issue as we are a male-dominated society. we live under a patriarchy, and our religious scholars generally they behave in a way that this male dominance is as if our religion is further cementing that, it's sanctifying that. I think this is a whole lot of approach which is inculcated in them when they study in their madrasas. And when they come out of their madrasas, even in our common schools, we talk about in the Pak subcontinent. So they give this male dominant version of religion a very, I mean, something of a reverence. And this is what they actually teach to everyone. So I don't think that there could be any different conclusion of what you just said. Unless the mindset changes, unless the nature of education changes, unless we have more women who are educators, unless we have women who are empowered in a way that, mashallah, all of you are sitting here, I don't see a very bright future. So it's like having that women empowerment, once again, women not going to that extreme as we see feminists going to, but of course, understanding the precepts of religion, understanding the Quran, coming close to the Quran. And I think the biggest thing that's going to empower them is the Quran itself, because as you said, that it is the Quran which speaks of their own rights in such a vehement way.
Other issue in the subcontinent, which is a huge issue. There are women are mentioned about Hafiz and Taras in the Quran, but of those, two are absolute numbers. One is inheritance, and the other is infanticide. Both are contributing in Pakistan society. Again, this scholars don't speak out of that. And those who govern the country, even if the law is made, don't pay any emphasis on these issues. We can go on.
Yeah, there's a whole list of things which goes on. But as I said, I think the only way out is that people get educated on their own religion, and it is here that we are lacking. See, we cling to religion whenever there is a need, whenever someone passes away, whenever we have a wedding, maybe, or things that need religious scholars. But other than that, basic attachment to the Quran, vis-a-vis to find out what it says about you, that is severely lacking. So as I said, I mean, the biggest thing that can empower a woman is the Quran itself. So all that she needs to present to any mullah or to any person who infringes on her rights is the statements of the Quran. Questions can be asked in Urdu as well.
And even the young kids there are also well. It's not like the topic related, anything else you get in your mind, you can ask. Feel free asking those questions.
About why that Salam and what is that?
Okay, so you see, there is a hadith which says women are naqisatul aql wa deen. This is in Bukhari, and generally the interpretation of this is that the word naqis means deficient. I mean, of course, it means something which is not up to the mark. So the conclusion is that a lot of people think that because the Prophet himself has said that women are naqisatul aql, it does mean that women are, I mean, they are second grade as far as their intellect is concerned. So as a result, we find a generally demeaning attitude towards their intellect. We think that they should not become judges, they should not become lawyers, they should not become professionals, or given higher position in society, because the Prophet himself has said that they are not aql, which means that they are deficient in their intellect. Now, if you study this narrative, you'll find out that this narrative has been grossly misinterpreted. First of all, if you study the narrative, it doesn't say naqisatul aql. It says naqisatul aql wa deen. Now, if the word naqis, the way we interpret the word naqis in the Urdu language is, of course, deficient or having some shortcomings. If this translation is correct, then the whole expression would mean that women have a defective intellect and they have a defective religion as well. because it's not just Naqisafi Akal, which the Hadith says. It says Naqisafi Akal wa Deen. So, I mean, how could the Prophet have said that they have a deficient intellect and at the same time they have a deficient religion as well? So there's something missing here. Now, the missing part here is that we at times don't realize that words, when they have, when the same word occurs in two different languages, it always doesn't have the same meaning. So the word naqasa in the Urdu language, it does mean deficiency. It does mean having a shortcoming, but not in the Arabic language always. In the Arabic language, it also means to give concession, to reduce the burden of someone. It's like reduction of burden. To give you another example, in Arabic, in the Quran, nikah is called a misaq, is a covenant. And not only is it called a misaq, it is said it is a misaq and ghaliza. Now, the word ghaliz occurs in Arabic, it also occurs in Urdu. In Arabic, it means a strong, something which is very strong, something which is very sturdy. But in Urdu, of course, ghaliz means something which is filthy. So you see, the word is the same. Ghaliz, the word is the same. And for this, we have this term which is called false cognates. They are false friends. And in German, we call them false freundes. They don't match. I mean, the word is the same, but the meaning is different. Take the example of the word bride. Now, in English language, the bride is a bride, I mean, she's a dulan. But in French, for example, a bride is a bridle or the reins of a horse. So maybe she's called so because she stops her husband from getting out of control, but that's another debate. The fact is the same word. The word bride meaning a bride in English, but meaning reins in French. So you see, this is a very common phenomenon. And this same thing has happened here, that the word release or the word naqis here, I would say, has been interpreted in its Urdu meaning. So in the Urdu meaning, it does mean something which is deficient, but not in Arabic. Arabic means that it is something in which you say that I've reduced your burden. And you find that the hadith actually goes along with it. Because when women ask that what is the naqs of our deen? It was a question that was very pertinent. And the Prophet replied that you are not required to pray or to fast when you are passing through your cycles. So this shows that this was like a concession given to them. Or in other words, the word naqasa doesn't mean shortcoming. It doesn't mean something which is deficient. It actually means that women have been treated in some directives within religion with leniency. So when they are passing through their cycles, they're not required to pray, they're not required to fast. So the example of the Prophet himself shows how the word was used by him. So unfortunately, because in the subcontinent, we are mostly conversant with the Urdu language, and in Urdu, the word naqs means defect, that we come across this meaning. Otherwise, what the Prophet was speaking of was that women have been given concession in religious and worldly affairs, vis-a-vis following it. Go ahead.
Yes. If the Prophet said that mosques should be simple and we should be decorated, why are the harms that decorated?
Did he say that? I haven't found. I mean, I could be ignorant. I don't think I ever come across that mosques should not be decorated. But what I think is that other than that, whether he said it or not, I mean, this is something that we all should think, that mosque is a place of worshiping God, and as such, I mean, they should be simple. But for example, if someone does decorate it, we cannot say that it is wrong. All that we can say is it's against our own taste. Maybe.
But when the Quran says that you can push women, what is the context for that?
So you see, first of all, we have to understand that the issue of wife beating has to put in its perspective. The way the Quran presents it, it tells us that basically it is a corrective measure that was accorded in a tribal society. Remember, I mean, I'm stressing my words. A corrective measure given in a tribal society. What that measure and what that implies, let me elaborate. So the Quran was revealed when we were at the juncture of a tribal society converting into an urban society. So we were being urbanized, but the Quran still had directives related to societies in which there were corrective measures that could stop women from becoming rebellious for their husbands and trying to break up the family and becoming unfaithful as them as well. So the Quran has said that if women take up to be rebellious, and one form of this rebellion is being unfaithful to your husband, and for this, if they start doing this, and if you fear that this is what she's going to do, then first of all it says that please counsel her, tell her that this is not the right thing to do, this is not the right way to go. And if she doesn't, doesn't listen, then the next thing is wahjuruhunna fil mazaji, which means that don't be intimate with her, leave her alone, so that she could know that this is not the right course that she's adopted. And in the third instance, it says that if she still persists, then as a corrective measure, not as a punishment, as a corrective measure, you can also beat her in a way that a teacher would teach his student or her student. And at the same time, that strike should not leave any wound on that, on the or any scar on the skin. So the summary is basically that women, if they become rebellious in a way that it would like to break the family or they would become unfaithful to their husbands, in tribal societies of those times, this was a corrective measure or a corrective possibility. It's not an obligation, it was a possibility. Even today, there are tribal societies in which this could be a corrective measure that would save the family from breaking up. But if in any instance you think that this would be counterproductive, or in most instances, I would say, yes, it would be counterproductive because living in an urban society to here, it is simply not an option that you would exercise. But the thing that we need to realize is that an option is always an option. It's like an option available in circumstances in which this option would be productive. In any other situation, this option should not be used at all. So it's like a possibility that if that usage of force would stop the wife from becoming rebellious and breaking up the family in such a way, then that measure can be resorted to. But the thing is that Muslim husbands, without realizing that this is a very, very extreme situation or an extreme measure which has been accorded to them, they use this in a very, very demeaning way, have a difference of opinion with their wives and end up beating her. So this is not a case of having a difference of opinion and then enforcing that difference of opinion. It's a case in which the system of family is disrupted. It can only be employed when the system of the family is being disrupted and the husband thinks that this corrective measure could be sufficient or could be useful in letting the family still sustain itself. Yeah.
What if it's the other way around?
Is it mandatory or the women or the
Man is
Talk about women.
Oh, yeah.
What we were doing
Yeah.
that.
Okay, so you see, for this, let me go into a little detail. So the system of the family, which the Quran has suggested, is the men are the head of the family because they are liable to earn for the family. I mean, whether a woman or a wife earns or not, it's not. I mean, she's someone who's not liable to earn. But the husband has been given this position of authority as the head of the family because he has been made liable to earn for the family. I mean, he has to come what may earn for the family. And as a result of this, he has been given this position of being the head. Now, whenever someone does something wrong in a situation in which there is a power sharing formula, then you take the accountability of these two individuals in a different way. To give you an example, when we are as citizens, when we violate the law, for example, a traffic law, a sergeant or a police cop would come and he would give us a ticket. But what if the cop is doing something wrong? As a citizen, do we have the power to give him a ticket? We don't do it. What do? We go to a court of law and we challenge that authority. So you see, whenever there is a power sharing, whenever there is a authority there, the way in which you check a person's ill way is not that you give them equal. I mean, you would not give them equal authority. So you would not say that, well, if a police person is doing something wrong, then the citizen can go and give him a ticket. I mean, this would be like there would be two equal authorities, and as a result, you would not be able to make any discipline. So it's precisely on the same principle as we people do, that we always challenge or we make accountable those authorities in a different way. So in this case, if the husband goes haywire, or he's in such a he's the oppressor, then a wife can always admonish him by using the elderly in the family, or she can even go to the court and report this behavior to the court authorities, and then they will punish him. Just as if a police person has done something wrong, you'll go to the court and then the court will punish that police person or maybe dismiss him. So you see, there's just a method that has to be followed. So if husbands get unruly, they will also be checked. But the nature of that checking would be different for how a wife would be checked. Can we what? Yes, we can. I mean, we can when you pray to God. So I don't see any problem. You go to the church and at the time of the prayer arrives, you just stretch out your musalla.
If you can offer a prayer in a church, there are lots of sculptures there. What's that regarding? Like, can you pray in front of or in presence of
So
sculptures?
you're not prostrating before the sculptures. You're doing it before God. So I think it's as simple as that.
So does it also kind of like eradicate the need where people think you should not have pictures or things in the house where you pray?
Because that again is a misconception. I mean, people think that a room which has sculptures of idols or statues or pictures, that's a room in which you should not pray. Now, once again, if you look at those narratives which say so, you'll find out that the pictures and the statues that were under discussion in the time of the Prophet were the idols that were worshipped. So the Prophet was actually referring to the pictures and the statues who would be prostrated before. I mean, they would be regarded as deities before. So it is about such statues that the Prophet has said that if they exist in your house, the angels will not enter it. That's very fair. But it's not talking about general pictures of your father, your mother, like you know.
Like sometimes people like to have sculptures, you know.
That's
like,
fine.
as a form
I
of
mean,
art.
as long as the sculpture is not an idol that you're
Yeah.
worshipping, which of course it is not, you can have sculptures as a decoration piece in your house.
Yeah.
Similarly, you can have any form of picture, any decent picture in your house. So the label of prohibition of sculptures and pictures relates to those which were actually worshipped at the time of the Prophet.
So is
Because
it so
idolatry
they
was
should
done
not
from
resemble to any of the, the known sculptures that are actually worshipped in the world,
like, for example.
like the Al-Mawrid or
Well, I mean, of course, that is something if you are doing so and you're
No,
basically
no, I'm saying if a sculpture like go to the souvenir shop and they're laughing
like,
colors and all
yeah.
that.
So I think if you take it as a piece of decoration, I don't see a
Fine.
problem with that. I mean, it should not be an idol that you're actually doing.
No.
It's just a piece of decoration.
So, why women get half the share of men in inheritance?
So, okay, this is also a very important question and something which has caused misconception. So, as you just pointed out, first of all, we have to make this distinction that it is not men and women who are different, because the mother and the father, they get equal share. So the father gets 1/6 and the mother gets 1/6. This is an issue between a daughter and a son. So it's like an issue which has a very specific connotation. It's not like Islam differentiates between men and women. It's between son and daughter. So as far as the son and daughter issue is concerned, again, I would refer you to this family structure of Islam. It says that men are the head of the family, and at the same time, it says that the issue of inheritance is based on manfaat or benefit of the benefit that you're going to draw from a person who is to be your heir. For example, a deceased person, the extent of benefit he would draw from a particular heir is what will determine the extent of the share. The more that benefit, the more the share. So the Quran says that in a family setup in which husbands are to be the head of the family, because girls are going to get married and their benefit is now going to be transferred from their own parents to their husband. So it says that this benefit, because of the fact it has been divided, that the share is reduced. But then again, there are instances in which this would not be the case. For example, there could be cases in which girls don't get married and then spend their lives, for example, because they serve a parent maybe, or they're in some capacity or the other, they are doing more service or being more benefit than the son himself. In such a case, the Quran says that you can always make a will in favor of your daughter, which is maybe more than the son. Because
So the
this
inheritance comes after the will.
this inheritance always comes out of the will. So you can make a will in favor of your daughter who would be serving or giving more benefit to your, for example, to the deceased. In that case, you can stipulate a particular amount which could far exceed the amount that your son gets. So that is just a general rule, the son getting twice. In exceptional cases, the son can get half as well.
Don't you think, with reference to that question, and you have mentioned it, that once the father dies, the girl isn't married, and she's got a brother, then the brother is responsible for all her upkeep. So the responsibility on the son is far more than the sister. Sister is not responsible for the brother's upkeep. So the responsibility, and the same thing
Yeah,
can be
absolutely
domestic
correct. I mean, there is the sense of responsibility. That's what I was referring to. That being the head or in charge of that situation, he's responsible more to maintain either a sister or a daughter as a result. So what, however, once the daughter goes to her in-laws, so her benefit actually is transferred to her,
Transfers to that
to her
family
or their own
husband.
husband.
But in that case, if the sister is not married and she is a brother of responsibility, is he allowed to take over her share?
No, of course not.
That's what it
That is absolutely prohibited. You just cannot take the share of anyone.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what happens in our
Yeah.
country, maybe.
Unfortunately, that is
Unfortunately.
very common practice in
Yeah.
Spain. That's just.
Yeah, that's absolutely incorrect. Yes, my dear.
Why do some Muslims own houses?
I don't agree with those Muslims. I think that you can keep a dog as long as it's properly trained. You can keep it as a pet. Go ahead.
Can I get one? If we got some written questions as well. Again, apologies for the delay. We, as per the schedule, we shall have only 20 minutes left. But of course, if you agree, we can extend maybe a bit longer, and then we will try to cover as much as possible. Allow me to take one question from here. There are so many questions that, of course, I'll try to write down. Related to that, but we're talking about the woman's misconceptions. Of course, it's mostly from the history, like historical evidence we have. So similarly, for men, they say if they don't go to masjid and they don't pray there, then there's something related to the Prophet that he said that I will go and burn that house. So what do you say about that?
Is it to be answered in Urdu?
In Urdu, सर उर्दू में कहते सवाल यही है कि अगर
वो नबी सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम की एक हदीस है कि जो लोग नमाज पढ़ने नहीं आते, मैं अगर मेरे पास होता तो मैं जाता उनके घरों को आग लगा देता। तो ये असल में इसका एक खास मौका है हदीस का, क्योंकि देखिए एक और हदीस है जो कहती है कि अगर आप मस्जिद में नमाज पढ़ते हैं तो आपको 20 गुना या 27 गुना सवाब होता है, लेकिन अगर आप नहीं पढ़ते तो नहीं पढ़ सकते। तो हमारे पास दो हदीसें आ गई। एक हदीस कहती है कि मस्जिद में नमाज पढ़ना सवाब है, अच्छा है, ज्यादा आपको सवाब मिलेगा। ये तो ऐसी चीज है जो आपको बताती है कि आप पढ़ भी सकते हैं और नहीं पढ़ सकते। लेकिन एक और हदीस कहती है कि नहीं, अगर आपने नहीं पढ़ा तो पैगंबर इतने नाराज थे फिर उन्होंने कहा कि मैं जाके घर को आग लगा दूंगा। तो देखिए ये वो जो दूसरी रवायत है ये नबी सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम की उस दौर की है कि जब मुनाफिकीन ने एक ऐसी मुहिम शुरू कर रखी हुई थी कि वो मुसलमानों के अंदर के आस्तीन का सांप बन के उनके साथ ये वाकया इफ कैसे हुआ हज़रत आयशा के साथ, उन्होंने तहमत लगाई हज़रत आयशा पे और इस तरह का मामला किया। तो अल्लाह ताला के पैगंबर जो हैं उनके बारे में अल्लाह कुरान में ये कहता है कि एक वो वक्त आता है कि जब उनके पर ईमान लाना जो है वो एक मुसलमान और मुनाफिक के लिए एक फारिक बन जाता है, एक काफिर और मुनाफिक के लिए और एक मुसलमान के लिए। इसका मतलब है कि अब आप अगर पैगंबर मस्जिद में है और आप नहीं आ रहे तो कोई उज़र भी आपके पास एंटरटेन नहीं होगा, क्योंकि वो आप मुनाफिकी में शुमार हो। तो ये एक मखसूस सिचुएशन है, ये एक जनरल सिचुएशन नहीं है। उस दौर के उन मुनाफिकीन की सरकोबी के लिए, उनको बेनकाब करने के लिए ये इख्तियार की गई। इस वजह से अब उस रवायत का मतलब ये है। अदरवाइज असल बात वही है कि मस्जिद में जाके नमाज पढ़ना अफजल है। अगर आप पढ़ते हैं तो आपको अजर होगा, खवातीन को भी मौका मिलना चाहिए, वो भी जाएं। लेकिन अगर आप वो घर पे पढ़ते हैं मर्द हज़रात, तो ये कोई ऐसी चीज नहीं है कि जिसको प्रॉब्लम हो सकती।
Any questions from audience? Great.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
जी प्लीज,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Right. If I want to get connected to God, is namaz the only way I can do that?
Namaz is one of the ways. I mean, that I would say there are two ways in which you get connected to God. One is through worship rituals, of which one is namaz. You have fast, you have hajj, you have qurbani, etc. The other thing is to be charitable in your life, to be a generous person, to be a person who has good dealing with her fellow men and women. And in that case, what you would do is you would be a person who looks after the needs of other person, who is always conscious that there are people who might need your time, who might need your skill, who might need your anything that you can offer them. So I think becoming closer to God is not just through prayer, but through serving humanity as well. And in order to become closer to God through worship rituals, I think we need to understand that why do we worship God? Like why do we pray? Why is it that we are called to offer namaz? And if we are able to understand the reason, then we would be connected to God even more through namaz. So you see, in this world, whenever someone gives you a gift, maybe on your birthday or your wedding or any other occasion, what is our instant reaction? We say thank you, gratification. And and we make a plan. Well, whenever I have get the chance, I'm going to return the favor. I'm going to be even more kind to her, even a better present. So you see, to thank someone is it comes instantaneously. It comes naturally to us. Now, if we relate this to the favors that we enjoy, look at the eyes that we are able to see from, the ears, and all the faculties that we have, and going on and on. We have parents, we have good education, we have good food, we have good clothes to wear, etc. So if we connect all this to the fact that, well, this is all being given to us by God. So there are other, there are other ways in which we receive this, but originally the first cause of all these blessings is God Himself. And if we don't enjoy these blessings and we take them for granted, we don't feel the loss as much as we should do. So basically, when we pray, when we do namaz, when we go to sajda, when we do ruku, we are thanking God for His favors by telling Him that, well, God, I cannot thank you enough, but all that I can do is to prostrate and kneel before you and acknowledge your greatness and acknowledge the fact that, yes, you are the one who has given me all this, and I would continue to be in your compliance. And also, my second commitment to you would be that the blessings that you have given me, I'll share them with my fellow brethren. So basically, coming closer to the Creator is by acknowledging His favors, His gifts. And as the Quran says at one instance, in ta'uddu ni'matallahi la tuhsuha, which means that you start counting the blessings of God, you'll not be able to count them. And I always give this example that, out of all the things that we have, I think our eyes are the greatest favor that we can have from God. And imagine that if you close your eyes, you shut your eyes, and you start doing your chores, you'd not be able to do that. In just a couple of minutes, you just realize how difficult life is. And imagine people, born blind, or maybe they are slowly becoming blind, and they are going through this ordeal, and you still have your eyes. So I think it's just a question of comparing how you have so many things and other people might not be having those things, and connecting this to God, connecting this to the fact that this is some being who's looking after me, and that needs acknowledgement. And when I kneel, when I prostrate, it is my acknowledgement. It's like saying thank you to God. I'm obliged, Jazakallah. Whenever the way we say Jazakallah to my friend when he gives me something, the namaz is like Jazakallah to God.
So if we just do it in our heart, Jazakallah, and say
So what you see, what the Almighty has prescribed a form as well, because this form also is something which your physical being needs. When you say it in your heart, your soul will be drenched. Yes, that your soul's duty will be finished. But God wants our body also to acknowledge it. So these bodily postures in which we place our forehead, which is the finest part of our body, right on the ground, and at the same time we kneel before Him. This is like your body acknowledging His favors.
Sometimes you just feel lost and you discuss it with your elders and they keep telling you to do the namaz. And if you still don't feel it in the namaz, what else you can do?
I think if you feel lost, first of all, you should analyze what is making you lost. It could be some concept which is wrong. It could be something that is missing in your life. So it's not always the namaz that's going to come to your rescue. Namaz has its own importance. But for example, if you're continuously not working hard enough and you're failing your exam and your parent says do namaz, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
Because you see, everything has its due that you need to go, that you give. But namaz is one thing that gives you this sense of gratitude. If you understand things that you take for granted, they need acknowledgement. And if you start expressing that acknowledgement, you feel good. Because imagine if someone gives you something and you don't say thank you, you feel bad. So you connect this to this as well. That if you don't say thank you to God, you should feel bad because He is continuously looking after you every day, day in and day out. And you're not saying thank you to Him.
But does Allah Ta'ala feels bad when we don't say
I mean, He doesn't feel bad. He feels that there is someone who is not doing the right thing. It's like a parent thinking that, look what I've done for my child. I have cared for the child. I've sent her to school and done all those things. And she does not express her gratefulness to me. It's like the father or the mother having the same emotions for the children. So God would also have the same emotions. He doesn't need the thank you. He doesn't need you to say thank you to Him. It is you who need that because it's like acknowledging Him.
How do you find this your way to research and everything and being a scholar?
How do I find what?
Like you found your way into research.
Actually, research and all these subjects, they are specialized teaching courses through which we go. We need to read the Arabic language in a lot of detail. We have to analyze the Quran in a lot of detail. Then we have other disciplines like, for example, Arabic, grammar, morphology, and with all related disciplines. Just as when you become a doctor, you spend 5 years in a university or a medical college or a med school in which you relate all those, you study all those subjects in detail. So when you become a scholar of religion, then that is how, it's exactly the same. The content is different, but the procedure is exactly the same, that you specialize by studying disciplines which relate to your area of study.
नमाज पढ़ते हैं सुनते ही पढ़ते हैं उसमें हम चारों रकातों में पहले अलहम शरीफ पढ़ते हैं फिर सूरत फर्ज नमाज में आखिरी 2 रकात में अलहम शरीफ और सूरत भी पढ़ते हैं
इसलिए कि नबी सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम से हमें ये महसूस होता है कि जब उन्होंने असर की नमाज पढ़ी, लोगों ने जमात पढ़ी, तो जो पहली 2 रकातें थी उनमें टाइम उन्होंने ज्यादा लगाया और दूसरी 2 रकातों में टाइम कम लगाया। तो लोगों ने क्यास किया, उन्होंने खुद कभी नहीं कहा। इसी वजह से हमारे यहाँ उम्मत में 2 नुक्ता है नजर के बाद लोग वो हैं कि जो दूसरी 2 रकातें हैं, काफी 2 रकातें हैं, उसमें भी सूरत पढ़ते हैं, क्योंकि प्रॉफिट से देयर इज नथिंग फ्रॉम हिज माउथ व्हिच स्टॉप्स अस। ऑल दैट पीपल हैव डन इज उन्होंने देखा कि अच्छा जो पहली 2 रकातें थी उन्होंने टाइम ज्यादा लगाया, इसका मतलब है सूरह फातिहा के साथ तो सूरह पढ़ी होगी, लेकिन दूसरी रकात या तीसरी और चौथी में थोड़ी देर के बाद वो चले गए, तो लोगों ने इससे क्यास किया। इस वजह से अगर आप चाहें तो आप सूरत मिला भी सकते हैं सूरह फातिहा के साथ, और चाहें तो सिर्फ फातिहा।
इस तरह 3 रकात
जैसे 3 रकात में भी ऐसा ही है
with the namaz.
जी।
How it was covered in practice, that why we have to say 3 rakat of the Maghrib and then with the Isha.
वो देखिए, ये तो ऐसे है ना कि जो मगरिब की नमाज को एक एस्टैब्लिश नमाज है, प्रॉफिट ने पढ़ाई। जो वितर की नमाज है वो बेसिकली तहज्जुद की नमाज है, जो कि अल्लाह ताला के पैगंबर ने कहा कि आपको तहज्जुद के टाइम उठ के पढ़नी चाहिए। लेकिन फिर लोगों ने कहा जी कि बाज़ दफ़ा हमें कुरान में याद नहीं है, या हमने यानी क्योंकि सवाल लोगों ने किया रमजान के वक्त, तो अल्लाह ताला के पैगंबर ने कहा कि दैट इज नॉट पॉसिबल, तो आप वो जो वितर है वो इशा के साथ पढ़ लें। ये एक यहाँ से कंसेशन है, वितर एक नफल है। The procedure of
procedure of 3 rakat of witr. You were saying 2 rakat and then third उसमें rakat में आप 3 दफा लोग कुछ लोग जिनको नहीं याद होती
वो पढ़ लेते हैं, कुल वल्लाह पढ़ लेते हैं।
And same is 3 rakat namaz maghrib and 2 rakats you are full prayer. The third rakat you be after saying atayat you start at the third rakat you say
ये वो प्रैक्टिस इस तरह से हुई ना कि प्रॉफिट को देखा, उन्होंने मगरिब की नमाज पढ़ाई तो उन्होंने 3 रकात पढ़ाई, और ऐसे ही पढ़ाई कि 2 रकात जो नमाज थी उन्होंने पहले जब नमाज में मस्जिद में पढ़ा, तिलावत की फर्स्ट 2 रकात में, और तीसरे में वो साइलेंट रहे और जल्दी उन्होंने रुकू कर लिया। उससे लोगों ने क्यास किया कि तीसरी रकात में सिर्फ अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह पढ़ा।
जल्दी यूं भी कर सकते हैं because we might say very small surah.
नहीं, लेकिन वो चूंकि persistent था ना, it was consistent and persistent for all the prayers. कभी कभी तो आप छोटी पढ़ लेते हैं, लेकिन हमेशा तो ही ना ऐसा होता है। तो इसी वजह से देखिए बाद लोगों का ख्याल है कि आप सूरह पढ़ सकते हैं, बिकॉज इसमें हमें कोई हार्ड एंड फास्ट चीज पता नहीं। और देखिए मजहब में बहुत सारी चीजें होती है जहाँ पे गुंजाइश और लेवरेज होती है, तो ये उन जगहों में से है कि अगर आप चाहें तो सूरह मिला लें, चाहें तो। हाँ नहीं किया, ये हैरत की बात है। यहाँ मेरे भी जन में सवाल आया था कि भाई कोई पूछ भी सकता था, लेकिन हमारे पास जितनी भी इसमें रवायतें हैंड डाउन हुई हैं उनमें कोई भी ये नहीं बताती कि सवाल किया गया। अगर ये किया गया होता तो हमें पता चलता। It's as simple as that.
Because I was obviously thinking that it was decided how to say the namaz. Fajr की नमाज decided की तो सुबह first time. उसके बाद ज़ोहर
हाँ, इसमें एक छोटा सा फर्क है, वो ये है कि प्रॉफिट ने जो डिसीजन लिया है वो तो हमें पता है, यानी वो था फर्ज नमाजों के बारे में और जो ऊंची आवाज से पढ़ी जाने वाली तो जहरी नमाज करती। बाकी जो साइलेंट नमाजें हैं उन्होंने उसमें आपको आजाद छोड़ा हुआ, यानी उनमें से बाज नमाजों के वो हिस्से जो आप अपनी जुबान में पढ़ सकते हैं, उर्दू में अंग्रेजी में आप पढ़ सकते हैं। कुछ चीजें हैं जहाँ उन्होंने अरबी में पाबंदी लगाई। तो असल में जहाँ नमाज में आपको इजाजत दी है कि आप चाहे मसलन आपको एक और मिसाल दूं कि हाथ बांध के पढ़ना है हाथ छोड़ के पढ़ना, ये ऐसी चीजें जो प्रॉफिट ने दोनों की इजाजत दी है, तो ये नमाज के आदाब में से। तो जो आदाब की चीजें हैं वो आपको आपके इख्तियार पे है। इसी तरह से देखिए आप रुकू और सुजूद में सुभान रब्बियल अज़ीम या सुभान रब्बियल आला पढ़ते हैं, आप कोई और तस्वीर पढ़ सकते हैं, जरूरी नहीं कि 3 दफा पढ़ें, आप 1 दफा पढ़ लें, 5 दफा पढ़ लें, और आप उर्दू या अंग्रेजी भी पढ़ सकते हैं। तस्बीहात का मामला ये है कि वो हार्ड एंड फास्ट नहीं। तो जो आप कह रहे हैं ना कि प्रॉफिट ने कट आउट किया, वो जो उसका जो नमाज का जो फर्ज हिस्सा था वो तो उन्होंने मुकर्रर कर दिया, उसमें कोई डिविएशन नहीं। लेकिन नमाज का एक हिस्सा है जो उन्होंने आपके डिस्क्रेशन पे, आपके इख्तियार पे छोड़ा, वहां पे आपको आजादी है। तो वो आजादी है जिसपे हम लिमिट से फर्ज में की उन्होंने।
When you're going to do ruku, you can't go to the ruku in that position and then stand up. You have to say something, you know. When you're saying something with a minimum requirement. I don't know this is what I heard 3 times.
तो वो
But
प्रॉफिट
you
ने
can say 6 or 9.
जी हाँ जी, तो प्रॉफिट ने हमें जो बताया ना उसमें वही कहा कि इस हालत में आप कोई भी चीज पढ़ सकते हैं जो तस्बीह की नौयत की हो, दुआ की नौयत की हो, या अल्लाह का शुक्र अदा करें। 3 चीजें, तस्बीह, शुक्र और दुआ। Any of these things, and you can say any word either in your own language or in the Arabic.
The whole namaz is to that you do.
जी
Doctor, why do men get to marry 4 wives?
यहाँ पे किसी की है? देखिए आप ये तो देखें, when God created man, when he created Adam, he did not create 3 or 4. He just created one. He एक पर बात पर चलती है, वो ये है कि जनरली अल्लाह ताला की स्कीम में तो एक बात होता है जो जिसकी वजह से आप घर को या खानदान को बनाते हैं। लेकिन इसके अलावा there could be certain contingent circumstances। कोई आदमी किसी से एक ज्यादा शादी करना चाहता है तो उसको इजाजत दी गई है कि आप कर सकते हैं। खवातीन को इसलिए नहीं इजाजत दी गई कि आप देखिए कि क्योंकि स्ट्रक्चर जो बनाया गया फैमिली का, उसमें कोई एक हेड ऑफ द फैमिली तो होना है। अगर खवातीन जो हैं मर्दों को हेड ऑफ द फैमिली होना है तो इसमें फिर क्या होगा कि उनको 4 हेड ऑफ द फैमिली मिल जाए, वो किसकी बात माने? तो ये एक एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव बात है। अगर खवातीन मिसाल के तौर पर हेड ऑफ द फैमिली कुरान की तजवीज़ की होती तो फिर को डेफिनेटली अलाउड होता कि वो 4 मर्दों को कर देते। लेकिन हेड क्योंकि एक होना है तो एक हेड के 4 तो हो सकते हैं, 4 बीवियां कुछ हेड पर 4 हैं। लेकिन ऐसा तो नहीं हो सकता कि एक बीवी के 4 हेड्स हो, यानी शी इज आंसरेबल, शी इज रिपोर्टिंग टू 4 इंडिविजुअल्स। So just as a company cannot have 4 CEOs, I mean it could have just one CEO. In a similar way, क्योंकि CEO is the husband, या तो CEO को चेंज कर देना, आप उसको बेगम को ले आए तो ठीक है, फिर वो कर। लेकिन अल्लाह ने तजवीज़ ये किया कि CEO should be the husband. Therefore, अगर आपको 4 CEOs मिल जाएंगे तो आप खुद परेशान हो जाएंगे किसकी बात है। मेरे ख्याल में
Also, many people say that the religions were made just to put limitations on human actions. And there's nothing true like religions or anything. And we see people that belongs to other religions and they are quite content with their religions. So how can we know that the religion we are following is the ultimate truth?
Well, we can know that because you see, if you follow it, you stand in line with God's scriptures that were revealed ever since the time of Adam. We have the final edition of God's religion in the form of the Quran. So all the previous books of God, they are books of God. We believe in them, we read them, we discuss them, but they are not, I mean, they are not preserved in their original language. So the edge which Muslims or the followers of the Quran have is that they can say that we have the book of God preserved in its original language. This is not the case with the Torah. This is not the case with the Injil. So in spite of the fact that they exist in translations. So we don't have their original. So what we can say is that this is the final version of God's, or this is the final edition of God's religion. And this is not sufficient. I mean, it's not just you have that final edition. The next step is that you also follow that tradition. So the problem which Muslims face today is because they have a ritualistic approach towards religion. And they think that as long as they offer the 5 prayers, they do their fast and they do the charity and hajj and etc., all the rest is not needed. So it is because of this ritualistic approach that we have become individuals who might be very religious in the worship sense, but as human beings, we lack a lot. We lack, I mean, such basic qualities and such basic human abilities that we are not able to be good persons towards other people. So I think we also need to understand that this wrong indoctrination, the way we teach our children, we don't teach them to become good moral human beings with good morals. All that we teach them is that you should follow certain worship rituals. So religion is not the name of certain worship rituals. It's the name of, yes, rituals, as well as being good human beings towards your own fellow brethren. I think this circle has to be completed.
Right. Sometimes I see, like, in our families, I give you a very small example. There are some rules which we are okay with the men doing it, but we are not okay with other men doing it. Let's say, for example, if your son is coming back to home around 12, you're okay with it. But if your daughter does the same, you have issues with that.
I think there should not be any discrimination in this matter. If the son is getting back at 12, the daughter should also be given the same, if not even more. I mean, it should be case-to-case basis. Because you see, if a daughter has gone to maybe her friend's house and they are having maybe they're playing some game or they're doing some work, this could cross midnight as well. So it's just a matter of analyzing that where exactly has she gone and where has the son gone. So if it is for a purpose, any purpose, entertainment is also part of that. Parents should not be strict in this matter, and they should give their grown-up daughters the same authority as they give to their sons. They should treat them equally. Yeah.
So in terms of when women become like when we're of age, for example, we're not married yet. In terms of independence, there is quite a lot of culture revolving around women being given a lot of independence.
Right.
And women basically being kept in.
Yeah.
And then guys go out, do what they want,
Right.
and go in college, perhaps. With women, we wouldn't necessarily do. I mean, they will be doing. However, what is the ruling on women being allowed to, for example, like if they want to choose to live alone?
The ruling is very simple.
Is there an Islamic ruling on it? Because I know there's a massive cultural ruling on it, and a lot of males, I think, dominate culture over religion.
Right.
And I think that's something that's.
So the cultural ruling is before you. I mean, this is what is happening. But the religious ruling is that as soon as a boy or a girl reaches the age of adolescence in which he or she can make her own decisions, she has the right to live the way she would like. I mean, she has total freedom to choose her career, to choose a spouse, to choose a way of life, anything. And if a parent stops that girl, he would be guilty, or they would be guilty of violating human rights. This is a right which God has given every single individual, whether girl or boy, as soon as that girl or boy becomes a mature person. So I think they have to facilitate. Yes, they can share their experience. They can tell their daughter that, well, whatever you're doing might be harmful, but then they should stop short at that. I mean, advice, suggestion, and all that they can give. They cannot forcibly tell their grown-up daughter or son that they cannot do that or they cannot do this, because this is their right. They are independent human beings. What if the parents do? Well, again, as I said, I mean, that is a strategy that you have to adopt. You have to educate your parents. You have to tell them that they are coming from a cultural perspective. It's not what religion is telling them. And if they say that is something religious, then they have to, prove it from the book of God. So generally what happens is that culture has taken the better of our dealings, and everything that is cultural has become as if it is a religious directive. So we have to differentiate between that.
But you don't think it's experience responsibility. I have two kids, but no, it's my responsibility. I'm growing them up, living at a very proper house, give them education, completing everything. At the time of the marriage come, both of them, I'm just saying, both of them, they're having their issues. they want something in their mind and they want to select that person to get married. By the time is passing by, I'm getting older, my sons and daughters are getting, they're more older. And I'm a bit confused in that way. Children think they're being forced to have a rishtas coming at this and that, and they don't like it. This is a common practice
Yes, I know.
happening around.
Something.
It's not the case with them, but it's
Yes,
a common
yes,
thing.
it's a
It's a
common.
very
Yeah.
common thing. And children think they've been forced by their parents to get married. It is not the case. It's the case of the society, it's the case of the community, it's
pressure.
the case of the family, and the responsibility of the parents. The children should get married on their nice age so they can have the continuity of their life.
I mean, this is very good ideally, but what if they don't get a spouse of their choice? I mean, this could be the, I mean, you see, ideally there is an age, but we are not living in ideals.
Exactly.
You see, there are so many things. For example, education takes a long time to complete today. Earlier on, the dynamics were totally different. So today we have to understand that we are living in a certain society which has certain norms. People get educated at a certain time, they get jobs and professions. They get settled much later in life than they formerly would used to. And plus, as I said, I mean, as a parent, you have all the right to give your advice, to tell your child. But what I'm saying is, you cannot force your child to adopt your opinion. I mean, you have to fall short and let them take the decision.
I don't think parents forces them.
Just related.
Sorry, I'm just giving that little bit more, but parents are not forcing them, as I said earlier. It's their responsibility.
Yeah.
So
I
they
mean,
can see
yeah.
the children are getting.
But for
married.
example, I mean, you have to relate this to your child as well. Yes, it's our responsibility as parents, but what if the child is not comfortable with the proposal that you brought for her? Or
Yeah,
him?
but where is these type of things stands in religion and in society, because there is no idealism exists in this.
Of course, but you
And
see,
if you find this thinking of somebody will come, and then you will say, oh yeah, this is the person it's clicking on me, and I'm going to get married. And for that person, you are not going to click.
this is a possibility. I mean, we are not living in an ideal world, and it's not always the case. So yes, you should teach your children to be more practical. Tell them that idealism is a base for hereafter. You can be very ideal later on, but in this world, you have to be practical. This is the advice that you can give. But I'm saying that if your child is not understanding, he or she is insistent, it is on such occasion that you should leave them alone and let them take a decision. So please.
So from what I see in Islam, a family is basically an institution. So the parents, they have certain responsibilities towards the children. And yes, they are working towards giving them suggestions and telling them stuff. When the children come to an age when they're making their own decisions, and if they go astray, how much accountable are the parents in terms of?
Yes, that's a very good question. I think they are not accountable at all. As soon as they reach their age of adulthood, in which they are responsible, so the responsibility just goes away from the parents. Now it's the person, your child, he is like a full-grown human being. So just as you are responsible for what you do, now they are responsible. So you have to treat them as adults. So one thing which I have seen in our Desi families is that it takes a lot of time for parents to treat their children as adults. Not even a 30 or a 40-year-old is treated as an adult. What to speak of 16 or 15-year-olds. And I think we need to revise this practice. This is not the right way to lead our life, because in that way we don't understand the dynamics of the society. We don't understand that God Himself has given this freedom. So if God has given this freedom, who are we to curtail it? Too much freedom. You know what? I mean, this is the freedom that I also have as a parent. If I am an adult and my child is also an adult, it is exactly the same freedom which we have. So you see, freedom can either be there or it cannot be there. So the Quran says, or the Almighty scheme is that as soon as a person or a boy or a girl reaches his mature age, now he is an adult. I mean, he is like you. The way you take decisions, yes, he's lacking in experience. The biggest thing is that he lacks in experience. The thing that we need to tell our children is that please learn from our experience. We are more experienced than you, but this is an advice that we give. Not always is our advice going to be accepted. So we should accept the fact that advice should not always be accepted. We should be content with that. What we do is that we become angry, we become jittery, and we would like our children to accept our advice. So it's like forcing them to accept advice. And in that case, an advice would no longer be an advice, it would become an order.
So this is the supporting the idea of the
I think we
culture.
should give a
Sorry, please.
Maybe totally off topic.
Yeah, sure.
Why is homosexuality a sin?
It's a sin because of the fact, I think it's a very good question, and it's a question that is the rampant society. You see, the Almighty wants to create a family in which two opposite genders, they come together and they provide for the needs of the child in their own peculiar ways. So if you allow this relationship, this relationship is going to damage the institution of the family. God says that He created Adam and Eve. He did not create two Adams. He did not create two Eves. Why? Because the child who is going to be born needs the affection of both the father and the mother. I mean, he would, if he's a person who has two fathers or two mothers, then there will be something lacking in his personality. You see, what a father can give at times is specific, which a mother cannot give, and vice versa. So the personality of the mother and the father, they influence the child in different ways, and the two cannot overlap. There are certain things in which this overlapping is possible, but you see, the personality of the father, the male gender, and the personality of the female gender, they have their own distinct features, and they're not transferable. So God says for a family to come into being, first of all, you cannot produce children if you're of the same sex. And second, if you adopt children in that case, then what will happen is that the child would be deprived of the other gender, which is also necessary for his or her upkeep. If there's a single gender family or a single parent family in which there is no father, then the child is bound to have some deficiency because the father is not there. If he's naturally not there, for example, he's dead, then that's another case. But if you program it that, well, he should not be there, then that should not sit right. So basically, it's the scheme of God that mankind should progress through the interplay of procreation of a man and a woman, and only that can produce children. And secondly, the child needs the affection of two genders because there are certain things which only one gender can do and the other cannot do. So that is why it has prescribed, in order to protect the institution of the family, anything which is outside this family. So just as extramarital relations, I mean, having relations with someone outside your wife, maybe beyond your wife, just as that is not right. In a similar way, homosexuality is also not right. Because both, they don't sit well with the institution of the family. They threaten the institution of the family, so to speak. You can go on and you can have cross question. Please. Yeah. So basically, you see, just give me a little while, because this is a very important area, and this society that we are living in, we are living in a society in which this LGBTQ issue is rampant. We just have Pride weeks, Pride parades in London, in Canada, in the US. So I think let me expand the scope of this question and discuss a little about this LGBTQ issue, because it directly relates to your question. You see, there are two things that we need to address here. One is towards the Muslim camp. I would direct you towards the Muslim camp, and the other is towards the non-Muslim camp. The first is towards us is that, as far as we are concerned, the thing which has really made things go out of proportion is this feeling of hate that we have for people who are homosexuals, for example. I think we have to understand that the sexual orientation is the choice of every human being. And that choice is something which God has given every human being. He or she is now answerable to God in that. So as Muslims, we are no ones to hate people who choose to have a different gender or who are same gender people. I think we are indoctrinated, especially our parents. I mean, I include myself, that as parents, we give this direction to our children that we should cut ourselves off, we should isolate ourselves, we should not talk to such people, they are evil people, they are sinful people. And here is an example from the Quran in which we find the complete opposite. We find the Almighty telling people that if you have parents who are mushrik, who are polytheists, you should not run away from them. You should still stay with them and behave nicely with them. And you see, polytheism is something which God is not going to forgive in the hereafter. But in this world, He says that if there is a person of your mother or your father who is following this orientation, it's not that you should hate them. You should live with them. So this is how the Quran tackles the issue of polytheism, regarding which it says, I'm not going to forgive it. But if your parents are upholders of polytheism, in spite of that, they do so, you should still be kind and polite to them. So this gives me this right to say that as far as the LGBTQ community is concerned, they are much lesser than being mushrik, or they are much lesser than being polytheists. So if for the polytheists, we have this direction from God to behave nicely with them. In a similar way, I think, yes, we have our difference of opinion. We would not agree with some of their what they do. But the thing that we are doing wrong as Muslims here is that element of hate, that element of demeaning them, the element of regarding them to be inferior to us. This is something which is not acceptable. And this is what we have to correct from our Muslim side. And one correction has to be made from the non-Muslim side, or the people who uphold LGBTQs. And that is that if we differ with them, they don't give us the right to differ with them. They think that if we differ with them, it's like we are against them, or it's a stigma. We should tell them that, well, look here, you are the champions of freedom of expression. You are the ones who created this liberty that everyone is entitled to his or her own opinion. So if I hold a different opinion as a Muslim, that I don't agree to your orientation, I have a right. I may be wrong, but I have a right to that. So at the moment, the reaction of the West is that they don't grant you this right of having a difference of opinion. You have to tell them that you are the ones who have always said that people can differ. And this is an issue in which I am differing with you, and you are not allowing me to differ with you. So this is a correction, or this is, I think, whenever I talk about the LGBTQ issue with people who are its proponents, I always give them this first step, that, well, before we discuss the dynamics of this issue, do you grant me this right to differ with you? If you don't, then there's no point in discussion, because that would be like having double standards. You have these standards for every other issue, but for this issue, you don't have the standards. So I think this is one correction that they need to make, and the other correction that we need to make, that we should eliminate this element of hate. We should not hate people. Look what the Bible has said when Jesus, once he was sitting with people who were great sinners, who were not good people. And the scholars of those times who were, of course, against Jesus, they said that, look what Jesus is doing. He's sitting with people who are evil, they're sinful people. And you know what, how Jesus replied? He said, I have not been sent to the righteous, I've been sent to the sinner. In other words, it means that if people who are sinful, people who are bad, they need our company even more. We should sit with them even more, so that maybe we can make a difference in their lives. Instead of, going out away from them, because people who are good, they don't need you. They're already good. But people who are bad, they need you more. So I think we also need to understand that we have to treat them as human beings. They are equal human beings. They are not lesser children of God. Let God deal with them. Let God decide their fate. As far as we are concerned, we should be polite, we should be happy, we should make friends with them, and we should treat them like any other human being, I would say.
Your question?
Yeah, my question is the aura of a slave woman and a believing woman different? Because in the tradition, there's a difference of opinion on this.
The overall means the dressing.
Yeah.
This is an issue which related to the times of the Prophet. And I think it's no longer relevant, even if there was a difference. It has gone away because the institution of slavery has been done away with. But yes, we have reports that for them it was not essential to cover their chests, or there was a different code of conduct or a different decorum for them. But as I said, this is all past, it's all history. Because slavery no longer exists, I think it's just an academic question. Whether it was different or not, I would say it hardly makes a difference.
Again, I'm just interrupting here. The conversation is going well. Nonetheless, for about 4 now. Food is there. If you are willing to stay after that meal, we may carry on. And if it's not, then
Even if they are not willing to stay, they are free to go.
no, of course, yeah. So, like,
Please don't make food condition to their.
No, what I meant is like, yeah, no, like it just starts a bit late. So, because I have a very good question here, and of course, we can see that the audience, they are also engaging here. And a few things I need to also say. And let me please say about that, and then of course, you can decide whether you want to continue with the food. I'm going to ask a few questions. Because Shehzad by kindly, of course, did this very.
You just need 5 minutes to say this. So
Oh, you need 5 minutes.
if you need a break.
Okay.
Just
Okay,
a second
in that
table.
case, I think we will take that break, I think.
I'll take a question later.
Maybe we can wind up and then. Is it better?
We're just getting food.
I just need to make
Okay, sorry. Okay, so this something we can wind up now as well. I think we still got a question, so I'll ask you.
Only better, whatever number of questions we have, finish them, because once the food is served, nobody.
Okay, we'll get this getting bored. It's fine, okay. Okay, okay.
You can ask the question while eating.
Okay, so we can do that, okay, so.
I just need 5 minutes to set up the table.
Yeah, okay. Just one thing on that piece, because this is, of course, vast majority of people are there, so it's not always to entertain everyone. Al-Mawrid UK, we are based, of course, in the UK, we are mainly in London. We just came up with an idea recently, Dr. Saab is here. He's kindly available to us almost every, 4 to 5 months, or maybe at least twice to thrice a year. If you, first, we will make sure that he's available for us in this region. Let's say we come to this north, like Manchester, Liverpool. If you could gather these 2 or 3 families, because what we would like to do is just these youngsters, they need to get engaged with that, because sometimes they don't know their like friends are here or not. But we've seen this in our London recently, that 2 or 3 families, they are kids, they are engaging with each other and they ask questions as well. And the doctors have also can explain further on that. Obviously, this is a never-ending learning process.
What he's saying is that if you have shorter gatherings or in a way that you can have a heart-to-heart conversation, that's also a possibility. It's not always that you have a lot of people.
Yeah.
You can also have 5 or 10 or 15 selected people so that they can have conversation or dialogue. That could also be arranged.
That could be arranged. We are available for that. Let's say for like this today's traffic or this issue for the delay here. So if you did make that one, please reach out to me. And if you need my contact details, I can give it to you. That's the important thing I wanted to say. And I think if we take 1 or 2 questions, meanwhile, yeah.
I'm president of so I just wanted to give in homosexuality, people are quite wrong. Like if I can, and it was also older. Sometimes development goes wrong. Basically, unfortunately, this
Right, right.